thank Diane and Robert for their invitation for me to speak here today. But I'd also like to thank all the other Australian researchers and personal friends that I've made amongst them who are here today and who I have met up with at a lot of other conferences. And I'd like you to know that I really appreciate your friendship and your support and your invitations for me to come over here and attend your conferences, because New Zealand is rather like a desert island to live in, particularly working in this field. But my colleague and I, Graham Opie, who's air traffic controller at Hamilton International Airport, are trying to make some inroads into that. Now, you've all heard Mary speaking this morning, giving you a very wonderful overview of the Star Children. I'm going to take a slightly different track today, along the same lines as Mary, but I'm going to focus on a different area, and to do that I'm going to look at only one personal experience, and we'll walk through the experience together and have a look at the different facets of it, the kinds of things that one experiences when one is taken on board a craft. Now, the things that I'm going to say today are positive, and that's quite a dangerous thing in some respects for a speaker on encounters to say, particularly if you were, say, in America. In 1998, I spoke at the Laughlin Conference in Nevada, and at the evening dinner, I was actually, during my speech, I was observed by a group sitting around their therapist, and these people were very much fearful of their contact experiences and very much anti-grey. And being quite naive in those days, I went to the States to speak about greys, and it wasn't until I got there someone said, well, what are you doing that for, you know? But anyway, I did. However, I did pay for it, because at the evening dinner I actually got pushed over by a particular lady who didn't agree with what I'd said. And unfortunately, this is one of the factors that we face within ufology, is that there's, as an area, any area, and I've been hearing also in the science area, there is disagreement and dissension, and that can be good because that can promote discussion and research, but it can also be bad because it can sometimes also stymie research and stifle it. So I'd like to look first, before I start on the slideshow, I'd like to look first at what has happened in the contact arena since, say, the late 40s, early 50s. As you're all aware, really modern day contact started with the contactees who had very positive, loving experiences with extraterrestrial beings. And then, of course, along a bit later, in the 60s and 70s, late 60s, 70s, mid-70s, came a different kind of experience, which was in general attached to contact with the greys, a different kind of being. And unfortunately, a whole persona built up around the abductee scenario, which has over the years become quite negative. Now, from that negativity arose people who, as Mary has pointed out, moved through their experiences, or for some reason or other didn't experience negative things with the greys, as I did not. Or people who moved through their experiences and found it transformative. What's happening? See you all looking up the screen. Who found it transformative, and so those people no longer wished to be classed or categorised as an abductee, because that then was carrying a connotation of victimhood and negativity. So then, of course, splintered away the experiencers group. And now we're finding, I am personally finding, and I know others also, that that category no longer fits the picture either. Because over periods of time, experiencers have now become slightly associated with some very new age concepts. And there are those of us who don't want to be in that mixed match either. And so I have created a category for myself, which one day I hope other people will feel that they can join. But I will name that later in a chart that I have drawn up to try to draw everything together at the end of the presentation. Right. Okay, so this is a rough outline of the speech. I am looking at only one experience, and I'm going to take you from the beginning when I go on board the craft to the end when I go back again, I go home. And I have divided that experience into 4 parts. The first part is Learning and using ET scripts, which you've heard Mary mention this morning, and this is a very common thing that is now coming to the fore, people who have experienced this. I'll talk about advanced telepathy, touch thought technology, holographic imagery, and some of the test procedures the kind of test procedure that sometimes we undergo on board the craft, and I'll explain that further. Part 2, we'll move on in the experience to consciousness-assisted technology and advanced light technology. Part 3, invisibility, multi-purpose technology, and artificial sunlight, ? Part 4, transgenic beings, sometimes now known as novel beings or normals, as called by Bud Hopkins, and the issue of protection. And then as a conclusion, I'm going to show you a chart that I have drawn up that is derived from information that was given to me by some of these beings, which explains to me, at least, and I hope to you, some of the things that may take place in our future, because we're getting very close to a time now, I believe, and I've heard other people making the same kind of comment, where we're going to make a giant leap. Just what that giant leap will entail and how we will be changed after that remains to be seen. Now, before I go on, I want you, I'm going to set the scene a little bit here, right? So I want you to imagine that you are all a group who have been brought on board a craft. You are not now in an auditorium. You are in a very bland grey room on board the craft. It is quite dimly lit, not as dimly as this, a different kind of light, okay? And you're here for a purpose. Now, pretend that I am a being up the front here, okay? And I am able to reach into your mind. I am not going to speak to you verbally. I'm going to communicate telepathically and sentiently. Every time in this speech I mention the word said, please read sent telepathically. But said is easier to say. Okay. Now you're also, every time in this speech I mention the word said, please read sent telepathically. But said is easier to say. Okay. Now you're all sitting here and you're still in your minds. When you were down back home, you were kind of just like we are now. But when you are taken on board, and I cannot explain this is something I'm still working on explaining, you go into the craft and your consciousness, your intelligence if you like, because you start to use different parts of your brain or different parts of your consciousness, is elevated. So when it becomes elevated, you start using your senses differently. So for example, George here. Sorry George, I'm going to use you as an example. Maybe perspiring profusely, okay? But you will not smell that perspiration. You may see it, or you may feel it emanating off him. You may look at the people next to you or in front of you, and you may see that they have got a pain in their body by either their emanation, their auric field, or something else. So the whole senses operate differently. And I heard Wallace say in a speech that every cell is aware of everything that is going on in every part of the body at the one time. So therefore, doesn't it make sense what Mary said earlier on today about someone who can read with their foot? Okay, so you're all sitting there and you're about to be given some information. Your senses have been heightened. So hold that thought of that ability in your mind, and perhaps as we go through you'll better understand what I'm describing. Press the button, nothing happens. That's because I'm pressing the wrong button. Okay, so first of all I'm going to run through 4 slides very quickly just to set the scene of the background of what I have experienced in my life. My experiences began as a very young child. When I say young, my earliest memory is about 4.5 years old. However, I recently, for the first time in my life, had some regression sessions with Mary, and Mary took me back to when I was 6 months old, in a windseat top with nappies, lying on my back, playing with my feet in the air. And I had been taken on board craft to learn to communicate with the other beings and the other children that were there. Not just human children, there were human children there, but mixtures as well, and we'll get into that as I move through this presentation. There were greys with me, and there were mixtures of different mantis and greys. There were greys and human mixes, and there were human children as well, all learning to interrelate. So isn't this rather like what we are trying to do down here at the moment with nationalities and ethnic groups? Gain an understanding of each other so we can better communicate. Hey, it's happening up there too for a purpose. So these beings would appear by my bed, and I don't remember any of the onboard stuff at that early age. It was just, I remember the arrival, them communicating with me and them leaving. At that stage in my life, they never showed themselves as anything other than a golden silhouette. So having come from a long line of psychics, and there's that familial tendency again, my mother, my uncles, my grandmother, my great-grandmother going back, all went to the spiritualist church, saw auras, did healing, early healing, all that kind of thing. So we have this familial tendency, and they used to say to me that it was my guardian angels, and to a child that was fine, I accepted that. However, there was one little factor there that didn't make sense to me, and that was they were very short. And in Sunday school, all the guardian angels were way taller than me. But as many contact people will tell you, these little details, it's almost like they're a secret. It's almost like you know to hold them back, okay? So that it doesn't complicate your life or what you're going through. I'm not going to go right into this, it would take too long, but I too have been through the fear factor. And when I went through the fear factor, it was when they really started, because I had no conscious memory of a lot of the childhood stuff. When I began conscious memory, it started with me actually seeing them as they really are. So now we see the features and the black eyes and the clammy white skin, etc. Now, at that time, there was a confusion in my life because I'd been, I'd accepted that these were guardian angels or spirits of relatives or whatever looking after me, appearing by my bed, looking golden, and then all of a sudden I'm confronted with this. Now, so there was a fear factor that went on there, and that fear was fueled by a lot of people who thought they knew a lot about this new abduction stuff that was happening in America. This is a bad thing that's happening to you. Well, I was relatively newly married with young kids, and that was really frightening. What is happening to me? Is it going to happen to my kids? If I'm taken away somewhere, will I come back with bits missing or whatever? So yes, there was an element of fear there for a while. Here it is. Now, this grey is one that I know intimately, in that right from the time that I was taken on board craft as a young child, I mixed with him because he was also young. Don't get mistaken that all of these beings are like thousands of years old or whatever, because they're not. New species of them and new lines of them, this is making noise, are being created all the time. Not only with our genes, but with theirs as well. So I basically grew up with this guy here, and to me he feels like a brother or a cousin. Now, just a quick physical description. You hear a lot about the black eyes and how they are, an eye cover or whatever. And that may be so. I've never seen them take them off, but right from as far as I can remember, the eyes were black like that. And when you looked into them, it was like looking into a jelly. Don't know if your mother's ever set jelly and they put fruit in it, and you can see into the jelly and there's bits of fruit. It was a bit like that, looking into the eye and being able to see other things. The skin was a very pale, creamy, pearly colour. That's done by my husband in charcoal, so it looks great. Okay, and the next one. It's a side view. Now, it's very interesting to note one factor of this, and that is that I've met Lloyd by a couple of times, and when he was describing the alien skull, he outlined one particular feature I found very interesting, and that was Our spine goes up into the back of our head in the occiput, and in the alien skull it shows quite clearly that the column goes up into the centre of the head. And that is exactly what I remember it going, more into the centre of the head than up the back. So let's have a look at the experience itself now. In 1993, when I was 39 years old, I had an onboard craft experience that I recall in quite considerable detail. I first spoke about this onboard experience publicly 10 years ago in 1997. 2 months ago, Mary Rodwell and I explored this experience in regression, and some gaps and details were filled in my existing memories. To give you some extent of to give you some idea of the extent of the information and detail contained within this experience, the regression transcript is 15 typed pages long, and that is without the inclusion of additional facts that I will put in, because during hypnosis there were long periods of silence, as Mary could tell you, where I was actually seeing and experiencing things but not verbalising it, and Mary had to keep prompting me to verbalise what I was seeing. So we're talking about quite a lot of information which I'm not going to be able to go into that deeply today. Now, a lot of experiencers and contact people speak about the fact that when they are up there, or even when they're down here, they have this longing to be in contact with those beings again. And when they are up there, they feel that they are more a part of that civilization than this. They feel more at home, and they feel that they are more family. And there's recently at the University of Texas been studies done into bilingualism, where they've studied people who have a mother and a father of 2 different nationalities. And when the child grows up, they learn to speak both of those languages fluently. Now, when they are speaking one language, they have noted through their studies that there's a particular personality change takes place. And you take on some of the personality characteristics, etc., of that nationality that you have learned. And the same when you swap to the other language, okay? And it makes sense to me that if you spend a lot of time on board a craft and you have undergone a lot of education and familiarisation with them, the way that they communicate, and some of the practices that they undertake on board, then naturally you are going to eventually feel comfortable in that environment. And if that environment becomes more enriching, more informative, more knowledge-based, has more wonderful and informative things about it than your day-to-day life here, then naturally you're going to feel that comfort in that civilization. You're going to feel that sense of belonging. So this picture here illustrates we have gone on board craft in a beam of light. I'm not going to go into that, it would take too long. We are taken into a corridor. There were 16 of us, adults, and we were taken along a long corridor to a room where a test procedure was going to take place. Now let's just look at that corridor for a minute, because the light on board craft is like nothing that we are familiar with. When you are walking along that corridor, it is as if there is no light source, like we look here and we have lights that direct light to us. There is no visible light source, and it is almost as if the air is alive with light around you, and you can see that it fades away here, fades away there. It's as if you are moving in a capsule of light. And hey, wouldn't that be a great energy save? Okay, we get a little spookier now. We are taken into a room, and we are each taken to a table, which I'll show you shortly, with a screen. And up the front of the room there are 2 very tall beings, and you can see I got my husband to draw a grey in there to show you the difference in height. Okay, very tall beings, and they wore garments. Those 2 at the front wore garments were rather like a bishop's cloak. Now, I will describe their different genetic diversity shortly. But these two beings are part of a group with an advanced level of wisdom that usually do not have direct contact with humans, but they attended this session as it was the final elimination process for a particular purpose within a particular program. They had originally started with a huge pool of people who were taught and then tested, with repeated elimination providing an ever smaller group until this final test procedure was 16 adults. They were looking for specific mind, brain and telepathic development or ability resulting from their years of instruction. There was an air of excitement in the room or anticipation and a feeling of unity of purpose emanating from the Greys. I was able to pick up on rapid streams of telepathy passing between them much faster than how they convey thoughts to us. Many abductees state that the Greys are humourless and characterless, but I've never found this to be the case, and I know a number of others that I've been steadily coming in contact around the world who say the same. Now I'm just going to go back to something I said there, rapid streams of telepathy. When they communicate to each other, it is like, okay? When they communicate to us, it's like, because we are not as adept as them. But obviously some of us have been learning those skills. But when they communicate between each other, it's just like a stream that just goes. And when you have been used to observing this and listening mentally to this, you get to be able to pick up little snippets here and there. Okay. Now each of us was assigned a grey partner, and mine was the one that I showed you earlier on. We were all familiar with the partner that we were with, and my partner was the being I showed you, yep, said that. The two tall greys up the front told us that an information transfer, what Mary referred to as a knowledge bomb, was about to take place with us, from our grey partner's mind to our own. Each of us would receive a different set of information, but with the same level of difficulty and capacity. Now, I've done that picture a little separately. I didn't put that symbol there to distract you before, but on my screen was that symbol. I remember that clearly, and when I came out of regression on this, I immediately drew it for Mary. I was able to draw that quite clearly. And I was told that for whatever reason, that was my symbol. Now, just prior to the transfer, that symbol came up, and we were asked telepathically to turn sideways on our stool, which was incidentally like a pedestal shape. The table was a pedestal shape. Everything melds smoothly into the floor. There's no sort of big joints and nuts and bolts as we would have. We were asked to turn sideways on a stool, and we went into what you might describe as a light meditative state to relax. And apart from that, a state of receptiveness, there was nothing else that we needed to do. Their brains can process multiple levels of information, sometimes even accessing it from another source and passing it through their brain to us. Think about that. They can transfer to us different levels of information. It's like you're receiving information, but at the same time, you're receiving a bit of conversation over the top of it. But they can also access information from somewhere else and pass it through to you. And I have witnessed that on a number of occasions, where there has been a group situation like this. There's been one bang up this front. Can you imagine total silence? Total silence. He's standing here, you're sitting there. But your mind, or your head, is full of thoughts that aren't yours. So you're hearing that answer from Rudy. You are hearing the thoughts from Traveen, who's also thinking about Rudy's answer. And you're getting this like this. This is where mankind will go eventually. So we sat there, and through the education programs implemented on board craft, they have been teaching these abilities to humans. And I'll outline my perspective on the purpose of this later on in the speech. Now, when the information transfer, or knowledge bomb as Mary calls it, begins, there was a mild tingling in the forehead, And in the eyes, or behind the eyes somewhere, there was light flashing of charts, colours, script, etc. Blank, script blank, charts blank, and it's all going in. Now, as you've also heard Mary say before, what we're talking about is encyclopedia loads of information, and in our time I was told the transfer took 1.5 minutes. So you suddenly have this information downloaded into your brain. Now I'm going to read from the regression script and then play a short video clip from another onboard experience, because this illustrates the complex levels of telepathy that are used by these visitors and how humans are able to use such abilities on the craft but not down here. And you will also hear me mention holographic images, which I'll talk about in a moment. Now, at this experience that I'm about to show you, I was with a group of humans who are about to receive a lecture from one of the higher level greys on the use of energy from plants as sustenance.
It's like we've got this real interaction going now. It's like super quick time, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. He's coming to different minds in the group, backwards and forwards. He's drawing stuff out, he's pushing stuff in. We're all seeing it, we're all part of what he does to each individual. It's like he's addressing lots of questions, lots of thoughts, lots of impressions all at once. He's just like multiple levels of going from one mind to another, and he's just pushing it all in there, and he's pulling it out, and he's answering your questions, and it's all just all happening at once, and it's, oh, this is fascinating.
Okay, so there's a total silence, but in your head you're picking up little snips of thoughts, and everyone around you can be frantically trying to quieten your thoughts because you know that they can pick up on them, okay? And you know that the person up the front, the being up the front, is reading you and getting to know you. And mentally, psychologically, psychically, or intellectually, none of those words alone quite fit the construct of what takes place. There's a different category that humans don't use that we use when we're there. Now, moving on, we were given this is just an artist's impression of this to show you the kind of thing that each person sitting at a pedestal table with a screen in front of them was given, okay? Now, the being beside us was given this sheet that looked not unlike an X-ray sheet, and on it were a number of boxes. The maximum was 6. On mine, there were 5 that were filled in. Now, I can't begin to describe what this sheet was like, because as he was holding it before he put it into the console, it appeared to be alive in the sense that you could look into it. It was very, very thin. But with their technology, whatever they had done, they had layered and layered and layered, so that when you looked at this sheet, which was about so big, you looked into it and you saw movement and colour, and you saw in particular that box there on the bottom left-hand side moving, and I'm going to go into that in a minute. And I was particularly captivated in the regression script. It comes out that I'm very captivated about this particular piece of equipment that he was about to use. Why these sheets were used as opposed to having something loaded on a computer like we do, I don't know. All I know is that they had some unusual and extraordinary quality about them. Now there I am, and I'm sitting at this pedestal-like table, and shortly you're going to see another abductee who's done something similar. Now you'll notice that I've got my hand on a little rectangle on the table. Now that wasn't like on your computer where you swizzle your finger around and you move the cursor. It was nothing like that. It was simply connecting, as far as I know, my electric field to that. So this is what Dr. Stephen Greer refers to as consciousness-assisted technology or technology-assisted consciousness. Once that sheet was put into this, it came up on screen, 3-dimensional. And that's when I really saw the beauty of the colours moving and swelling, which of course I can't animate on screen here, but the colours in the left-hand bottom box were moving and swelling, and I was quite intrigued by that. Now, what I had to do was look at the information given on that chart, and I had to be able to solve some kind of problem that involved the boxes. And on there you can only see the left-hand bottom box, but the other boxes had script in them, and one was something that resembled like a planetary chart. And somehow or other I had to access the information that was in my mind to solve whatever this problem was. And to do that I had to be able to go through hundreds of pages in a very short time. Hundreds of pages I had to be able to draw into consciousness, check it out, no that's wrong, bring it forward, check it out, or whatever. And be able to flip between the different components that they had put into my head to solve something. Sounds very complex. I'm actually researching information at the moment on the retina because the eye seemed to take a very big part in this. And you'll notice there that there's like a holographic image of a page out in front. That was the next most unusual thing, was that I was able to flip out of my mind a holographic image of a page, if I wanted to, and check it out. And then I could flip it away into wherever, gone. Now, that's how difficult for even me to comprehend. But this came out very, very powerfully in the regression, and I was absolutely astounded and fascinated at this process. So the retina is the thing that I'm researching at the moment, because I have found that the retina is a small part of the brain that sits separately. It is brain tissue that sits separately from the brain. And researchers have discovered that the retina seems to have a memory of its own. It seems to have a categorizing system of its own that filters through to the brain. So I am wondering, in my total scientific ignorance, if that has something to do with what I was able to do on board the craft. So that the retina, perhaps, or some factor of the eye, the optical nerves, are acting as a gatekeeper for something. Incidentally, some years ago I woke up one morning, this is just a little aside that relates to this. I woke up one morning and I'm lying in bed, I wake up and I open my eyes and I'm looking at the ceiling, but about here there's a little screen. It's like looking at a little TV screen, and on it there was a grey looking at me. And it was like we both went, huh, and it was gone. So it's entirely possible, as a lot of contact experiencers will tell you, that I have something in my eye, because I have been told and have seen evidence on board craft that they can see what I see in my daily life if they choose. So therefore there's got to be some mechanism that enables them to do that. Okay, we're going back to these guys again. Now, there's clear genetic diversity there. They're both of a high rank. They both physically illustrate the fact that there are mixes of ET races. And, you know, a lot of people will say, oh, these ones are good and these ones are bad. You know, a lot of the experiencers get into this business of good aliens and bad aliens, and these ones don't work with these ones and these ones work with these ones. Well, I actually haven't found that. I've actually found that there's quite a conglomerate going on. That in the same way that we have genetic diversity, they also have genetic diversity. Now, when I was a child, I had quite a lot of contact with beings that looked like the ones on the right. And as a child, I nicknamed them the crickets. And recently, my husband and I looked up some pictures of crickets on the internet. And if you look at the face of a cricket, you'll see the eyes are set out here and the head slopes back like that. So I can imagine that to a small child, a very small child, looking up at a very tall being, and these ones were, and seeing those eyes and the very sloping conical head, that it would be natural to think they looked like a cricket. Now, it isn't the first time that I have seen beings like that one that I showed you that was on the left in the previous slide. This is from another experience I had where I was taken on board, wait for it, a rectangular box-shaped craft. Where are you? Okay, and a number of people, heaps of people around the world have seen box-shaped craft. But I was taken on board for some kind of interview, lecture with a being that looked like this. And so we see the same cloak-like material that's covering a very lined, very wrinkled body, a different stock from the grey that I put up originally at the beginning of the presentation. And I'm not the only one who's seen these kinds of things. This is a drawing done by Alice Taylor, who's a very good friend of Mary Rodwell's, lives in the UK. And I've met Alice, and Alice has a virtually identical drawing, same kind of lined face and lined body and cloak-like garment, and he calls his wise being, and certainly that was the aspect that I was shown, that these were very, very advanced beings, and that they did not often communicate directly with humans. And just another drawing, this is done by a lady called Elaine Taylor, who I met at the Exopolitics conference in Hawaii last year. And Lorraine has obviously had contact with a similar kind of being with that long conical head and the very elongated pointed eyes. And if we look at some of the ancient Egyptian drawings of some of the beings that were worshipped or seemed to be otherworldly and highly knowledgeable, we get that same sort of elongated eye, but we also get this big long head that's conveniently covered with a hat. And I have to wonder if there is a link there in the Egyptian society where there was a huge input of knowledge that we no longer have available to us and has been lost. Now let's have a look at some of the data that was displayed. I'm just going to go back a little bit, have a look at some of the data displayed on the screen. Alright, so there were 2 boxes out of the 5 that showed diagrams, one of particular points within a planetary system. That's the one on the right. This is my husband's artistic interpretation of it. And an organic display there of fields of gravitational influence or interaction of electromagnetic fields. I was told by the beings that they used routes between these planetary bodies, which are indicated by the darker circles, the darker spots in this drawing here, that they used fields or tunnels between these bodies. And my task in this test was to explore the massive amount of data that they put into my mind or consciousness and formulate the routes of travel appropriate to these systems that they had given me and the interactions between these unfamiliar planets. They made a point of telling me that this form of travel does not disturb the energy fields as it would if they were just to cut through the fields willy-nilly, but rather utilises the natural energy flows. They gave particular emphasis to that detail of not disturbing the energy fields, as disturbances can affect all associated life, and it was pointed out that we do damage by thundering out into space in our primitive spacecraft. They also pointed out that on a smaller scale, they often use similar tracks or routes within our planet's atmosphere so as to cause the least disturbance to Earth's inhabitants. And I think here of Earth's ley lines and New Zealander Bruce Cathy's grid system. Thousands of flights traverse our skies daily, and perhaps we too may eventually understand the unseen harm that this disturbance of natural energy fields is causing to life on Earth. Now, some months ago, because I'm not a scientist, my apologies David, my apologies Wallace, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a physicist, and I have been trying to make sense of what they told me for some years, because I have never been a person who just has these experiences and like, oh well, I've been abducted and I have, had all these experiences. I prefer to investigate it more with an investigative approach and a more down-to-earth approach. So I want to know what it is they have shown me, and I would like to be able to understand what they've shown me, and I'd like to be able to find something that corroborates it. So I have read a variety of things for months on end, and I came across something called this. The Interplanetary Superhighway, or IPS for short, and I tracked a number of articles down in New Scientist and American Scientist on this. It's a term used to describe a vast interconnecting network of winding tunnels or tubes passing through the gravitational fields of planetary systems between planets or a planet and its satellite or moon, like freeways in space. These gravitational fields are moving, not static, so the patterns of highway interchanges keep shifting. NASA researchers speak of the subtle gravitational interactions of planets. And does that ring a bell from the picture I showed you of this slight movement going on, like an energetic swelling and moving? Travelling large distances along these tubes would take us a long time, but it would appear that the visitors, or ETs with superior knowledge and technology, are able to utilise these routes quickly. NASA's Genesis mission in 2002 used this freeway on its mission to collect solar wind particles. For every 3-body system, such as planet, sun, spacecraft, there are 5 particular stable points in the gravitational fields called Lagrange points, where one body's gravity balances another. Here the tubes intersect, providing opportunities to move from one to another, and with an increase in velocity to make the transition at exactly the right moment and the right speed. In this next one you can read, it's self-explanatory. Make you do the work. And this one is for the Jetsons fans. Now, does this ring a bell? Researcher Edward Belbruno, a Princeton University mathematician, stated, traditionally, spacecraft have used fuel-guzzling engines to punch their way across the solar system. Travel on the IPS works with gravity, not against it. The old way is like using a 747 jet to blast through the sky. The new way is like using a glider plane, which rides the natural currents and eddies, which is exactly what they were illustrating to me and telling me about in that X-ray-like sheet. Now let's go back to the X-ray-like sheet for a minute and examine some of the other boxes. We can move on to something I feel a little bit more comfortable talking about. Okay, so you'll notice that some of those boxes have script on them. Almost everything associated with these visitors is multi-leveled or multi-purpose. Their telepathic communications, their genetic diversity, their technology, their travel, etc. So too are their scripts and the means of using and communicating them. Now, it might occur to you, as it has done to me, that in a civilization that relies heavily on telepathy, one might not need a script, but they have a script, as Mary has illustrated. Now, as to whether this is their script or whether it is something, as writer and abductee Jim Sparks has proposed, is something that they have created that is like a bridge to communicate between us and them. Because a written script is something we understand, perhaps there has been some kind of formulation of something that we can relate to. However, when you look at the symbols up here, you'll notice that there's hardly any. So you're probably maybe wondering, well, how on earth did she manage to work something out with so few scripts? Well, as Mary also illustrated, the placement and the condensing of script is something that a lot of abductees talk about. So, for example, you look at the box up the top, you'll see that script is placed in a certain way, a certain pattern. And when you look at it, if you are on board the craft and you have this heightened awareness of the communication and the way that they operate, you are able to actually look into the script and you're actually able to draw a great deal more out of it. So when you look at one symbol, as Tracy Taylor was talking about on the video this morning, you are able to open up your mind, and in there, from that one script, is a great deal more. There may be hundreds of pages. Okay, so we're talking about a condensing of the script. So when I looked at one symbol or group of symbols, I was able to three-dimensionally, or holographically if you like, mentally look into the symbol and perceive another group of symbols and another larger and larger amount of information, etc. And I was able to draw extensive information from a small symbol script. Now, Jim Sparks is an abductee who's doing a lot of speaking around the world at the moment, particularly in the States. He's American. He's written a book called Keepers, and it was a revelation for me this year to obtain a copy of his book, which hasn't been out very long. And lo and behold, he has drawings of exactly what I have experienced. So here we are, we have Jim, and he's sitting at the same kind of thing. He's got a screen in front of him, and he is learning some script. He was taught how to use the script. The only difference really I can see between Jim Sparks and I is that he talks about being forced to learn the scripts, whereas I have no recollection of ever being forced to learn them. In fact, I can't understand why they would go to the trouble of forcing someone. That is his memory. Okay, so here he is at the screen, and there he is, he's got his hand attaching himself electrically or whatever. Maybe Wallace could instruct me on that one. He's attaching himself to this consciousness-assisted technology. And certainly in the screen that you saw earlier on that I was sitting in front of, I was able to instruct it with my mind. So if I wanted to bring up one of the boxes bigger, I instructed with the mind and up it came. Now, we are developing technology like this ourselves, where the disabled can move cursors, etc., and operate machinery that they may not have otherwise been able to do. Someone's phone? It's very distracting. Okay. So here we have an example of another person who's also deciphering script, and this is Betty Andreas and Luca's daughter Becky on board craft. And it's yet another example of abductees being taught a script. Now you have to wonder, what is the purpose of this? And you can see that she is also operating by touch. She is touching different parts of the screen, maybe to bring the script up closer, or whatever. And you can see on the left-hand side there's circles of condensed script. Very few symbols, but obviously they mean a great deal more than what is illustrated. And this is Jim's illustration of the condensed script. It shows you up in the left-hand box. You've got a great deal of information. It can be condensed down further, placed in a particular configuration, and then when you look at it, you're able to draw a great deal more out of it than what is illustrated. Now, speaking of the script, some years ago, when I was mid-30s, long time ago anyway, I went to a friend's place who was a sewer, and she had a bolt of fabric there because she did sewing for other people, and it was pure snowy white, and all over it were these black script-like symbols. And I just had to have a piece of that material. Now this might sound kooky, but please, please, Jenny, give me some of that fabric. So she cuts off a piece, and I take it home. Now you can imagine what the husband thought. You love a piece of material. You can't stop looking at a piece of material. But once again, it's that trigger of something that I was experiencing. And at that stage, I hadn't had this experience, on-board craft experience, and I was recognizing these kinds of symbols. They were so similar to what I've seen on board the craft. I could not take my eyes off them. They were it was reverently put away in a cupboard. It was hauled out regularly and stared at because it meant something. It was so familiar. And of course, this is the kind of little thing that happens in relationships where abductees are probably one of the biggest group for splitting up with the husband and the wife, because it's these little things that can seem bizarre. But to the person who's experienced something like this, it has great meaning that you can never convey to your partner or husband or wife. Okay, we're moving on now. So we're returning now to what happened next. I've been in this room, I've done this test, I've used script, I have used symbols, I've used holographic imagery, I've used my hand to touch the technology and make things come up on screen, recede or whatever else that I want. I've completed the test, and there were 4 of us who passed out of the 16. There were 3 males and myself. Now, I was asked if I would like to take the pile of X-ray like sheets down to another level of the craft. And this is how I got there. Now this is actually a drawing of when I first used this piece of equipment, and I was only about 12 years old. I call this the light elevator. It was a tube-like structure in an area of the room. It hummed slightly. It was filled with intense light that had blue flashes in it. And at the age of 12, I was asked to learn to use this. Now, that was a fairly scary thing, and that's why I'm sitting there and I've got my feet in it. Because I've been asked to step into something that does not have a floor. Now, okay, for years I've been going up and down in a beam of light, which does not have a floor. But to a 12-year-old, this is something different again. This is something I'm not familiar with. It's a tube of humming light. It's very bright. I'm told to get into it. I don't know quite what's going to happen. But it was eventually explained to me. But I still resisted and stuck my feet in and felt quite nervous about it. When you get into this tube of light, all you have to do to go up or down like an elevator is think. And you think a symbol. And that's what I was taught. You get in and you think, and you're there. Suddenly there's a different opening and a different room in front of you, and you step out. Now for years I thought about this and thought, oh my God, I must be really going crackers now. But fortunately, I discovered a number of people who've seen the same. I want you to please note the symbol on the wall before we move on. When you looked at that symbol, you could look holographically into it, and you could see a whole lot of other information. Once again, we have this condensing of information down to something quite small. Now, here we have a drawing by a man in the States that I've been communicating with for some time. His name is Jeff Westover. Now, Jeff is a graphic artist. He has worked as an artist for MoveOn. And one day when I was scanning the internet looking for things that were similar to what I had experienced, I came across this. Jeff has also experienced the light elevator, and I wrote to him about it, and he says, Suzy, you have described the liquid light tube exactly the way I remember it, both in appearance and in sensation. And he went on to say, and there was a panel near the tube that contained a waveform of oscillating alien symbols as well as blinking red lights. I felt as if this panel somehow monitored the light tube's functionality. And yet another person who's seen it is, this is a 15-year-old drew this. I met this girl recently in Perth when I visited Mary, and she has also travelled in the same light elevator. So we have here what Dr. Stephen Greer in his recent book, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, says the extraterrestrial civilizations have technology-assisted consciousness systems as well as consciousness-assisted technology, where there's an interface between mind and thought and specialized physics and electromagnetism. They can think to a device or interface with a device, and it will instantly and accurately convey that signal and that message to another point. And this is technological, it is not just telepathic. And he goes on to say, a number of people I've worked with who have been in covert aerospace and electronics firms that deal with this subject have confirmed to me that we have retrieved extraterrestrial communication devices that do exactly that. They interface with thought and consciousness. They are tuned to be able to do that. This involves some very sophisticated physics and also encompasses the realms of thought and consciousness. So there we are, we have them all together, and that's the kind of thing that I have seen and experienced. Now, so I go down a floor in the light elevator, I step out and I see this scene in front of me. Alright? Now I want you to pay attention to that dome in the back in there. Okay, it appeared to me to have, it had a lot of plants in it, it also had humans in it, and it had greys in it. I don't know what it was, but I can assume that it was some kind of artificial sunlight, although how the greys would react to sunlight, I don't know. But that's just a little something that I haven't found anyone else who's seen similar yet, but I'm still looking at that. However, what I want you to look at is the actual screen there, that you can see that through. Some years ago, when I had this experience, I was told by that being there that screen could perform 5 different functions. It could be a window, it could be a wall, so it could just disappear and become the wall of the craft. It could be an archive storage of information. It could enable you to see outside of the craft and other rooms within the craft. And it could also show, like we would show a video. Okay, it had 5 different functions. And sometime after I'd had this experience, I was watching TV with my kids one day, and on came a documentary by, wait for it, Bob Lazar. Much criticised person, you know, has had a rather checkered history, apparently. However, I can only state what I experienced, and certainly Bob Lazar was sitting there on a TV and he was describing back engineering a craft in which there was a 5-function screen, in which it could become invisible and it could take on other functions. So, you know, we have to give people some credibility. And I was going to play a little video clip, but I'll miss it out. Now, while I was having dinner with Dr. Roger Lear in Perth when I spoke at Mary's conference several years ago, Roger started describing a friend of his who's high up in the military who was taken to a base and was taken on board a craft, and Roger's actually given me permission to tell this story. So this person in the military was taken to a base, and he was taken to a field or runway, and there's nothing there, but he has been told there is a craft there. So we're talking about invisibility here, and we all know what's coming to the fore with that we are developing that ourselves, if we haven't already. And this man was given, a military personnel was put on either side of this man to assist him to get into the craft because it was invisible, and he was taken forward to like a mark on the ground and told, okay, there's steps in front of you, there's 3 steps, you are to step up, we will assist you, 1, 2, 3. And as he went through what was obviously a door, the whole interior of the craft became visible. The exterior was not visible, the interior was. But what struck this particular man was that on the wall there was a screen-like thing. And it was described to him that it had 5 separate functions. It could be just go zap and be a wall. It could go zap and be a hole, like you're looking through a hole, a window. So I'm getting this corroborative evidence from these sources also of this kind of technology. Okay, so we'll miss Bob Lazar.
No.
And we'll go on to that. Now, I have also seen on another occasion a dome that I would call inactivated. So you couldn't see into it, but it was still the same dome-like structure. But maybe that was supposed to be like night inside the dome. I have no idea, but it's the same dome-like structure that performs a function. How am I going for time? All right, so we're back there and I'm standing there. We're into the next part of the journey now. I'm standing there, I've delivered those sheets sitting on that console there, and I sense something behind me. I sense movement, but more than that, I sensed an emanation. And when I turned around, this is the being that I saw. Now, Bud Hopkins talks about not hybrids, but transgenics, because we are looking now at the fact that for years within ufology we've referred to hybrids, but of course we now know that a much quicker way of making a change to a species is transgenics, and we are actually developing transgenics ourselves now. We are introducing material into animals that is going to produce tissue for human use, etc. So we've got these crossing of the species in a way other than hybridization. And I believe that this being was a transgenic. I can't begin to describe to you the immense power that emanated from this being. And by power, I'm talking about his telepathic capacity, his intelligence, his whole consciousness was just like woof out, and that's what I felt when I was standing with my back towards him. Now, he had very stunning eyes, as you can see. And you can see that they have like a cat-like shape in the middle, but you'll also notice that the pupil goes across the slit, not down. Now, every time my husband tried to draw this for me, he'd say, the slit should go the other way, and I'd say, no, it doesn't, it goes that way. And I know that it looks odd, but that is how I remember it, and that is how it was, and that's how it came out also in the regression. Now, I asked this being, because I was so fascinated by him, I asked him if he had some advice to me for my future. You know, have you got something you can say to me, some advice for my future? And he told me that he knew me, that he would work with me, that I would meet him again, and he gave me one word. He said, I will give you one word, corroboration. And for years I did nothing with that word until recently I realised that in the future, people like myself whose stories and experiences are very anecdotal, that is what we have to seek out. But of course that's the hardest thing, is getting scientists or people who have an understanding of things we don't understand to give us that information that we need to put the pieces together. And really we all need to be working together on that, and I hope that one day that will come. Now, this being here was quite stunning, and he struck me as if I knew him well, but at that point in time I had not encountered him, and I felt that he was very much a being of the future, that I was seeing someone that was going to come, that was a new breed, shall we say, being developed. I felt as if I knew this being and recognised his energy field. There was something about the way he turned and looked at me that made all my hair stand on end. In a recent regression session, it was revealed that this same being I encountered when I went to Laughlin, Nevada and spoke at the conference. I had a strange experience at the end of the conference whereby I went with my husband to a car rental place, and we got into the car. The lady was in front driving, and there was a very strange person sitting in the seat next to her. She made no conversation with him. It was as if he wasn't there. And we didn't converse with him either, because I certainly could feel this huge energy coming off him, which kind of threw me. I felt I recognised it, but I didn't know where or how. Now, I'd had a terrible experience at the conference whereby a disinformationist, the David Morehouse, the remote viewer, warned me too late that there was a government disinformationist there trying to get around the abductees and people who were talking about their contact experiences and throwing them off beam. Well, I had an interview with him for an hour and a half in my room because I was very naive and I didn't know who he was. And for the first half hour, he was very nice. The second half hour progressed, it got a bit nastier, and the last half hour, I couldn't get him out of the room, but nor could I get out of the room. Something was stopping me. As to whether it was something he was doing, I don't know. But he pounded the table and he threatened me, and he told me, you know too much. You have to give this up now. I know you have 2 sons. If you don't give this up, are you not worried about what could happen to them? That was a terrible experience for me. And after I'd had that experience, I raced downstairs, spoke to my husband, and that's when I found out from David Morehouse about this guy. Now, more or less the next day, we got in the car, the conference was finished, and I was heading off. We travelled to a car rental place with this guy in the front, emanating this field. And when the lady got out of the car, she had been talking to my husband about what we had been doing in the States, and he had said I'd spoken at a UFO conference, and he said I'd had a bad experience because someone had threatened me. She got out of the car and she went in to organise our car, and that guy turned around like that and said to me, he looked me dead in the eye, and he said to me, and as he said it, every hair on my body was standing on end. He said they always look after their own, looking in the eye, and the words went poof. And then he got out of the car and he walked off, leaving us stunned. He walked to the door and he went through it. And I'm saying to my husband, quickly, quickly, go after him. I need to talk to him. I want to know what he means by that. I want to know about this guy. He raced in there. We went right through the building. There were no other doors out apart from going behind the counters where the workers were. My husband went into the toilet looking for him. He was nowhere to be seen. We asked other people, did you see this strange-looking guy come through here? He's got hardly any hair, and he's got really blue eyes, and he's looked a bit odd. Nobody had seen him. When he walked through that door, he was gone. So here's this protection thing that I mentioned in the chart of what we were talking about, and this protection thing that seems to be talked about by a lot of abductees and contact people, whereby if you are on one of their programs, there is something there that they look after you. And that was certainly evident on that occasion. Okay, and we're drawing towards the end now. This is also another person who has seen something similar, where the transgenic can appear to be like looking like a space entity, an extraterrestrial, but they can also appear in our life looking quite human. How much longer do I have? We started a bit late. 5? We started late. Okay, thank you. Any offers on that? Okay. All right, now this is a chart I've made up from information that I was given in a regression I did with Mary last year, which was the first one I'd ever done in my life, because I've always relied on my conscious memories. But we did one tentatively last year, and then earlier this year, I suddenly had the feeling that the urgent message that now I had to go and have regression. So I found the fear to go over and stay with Mary, and a lot of information came out. Now, one of the things that I'd like to quickly show you here is this chart. Mary has talked about the star kids, the new humans, and yes, they are, okay? But I have been told by the ETs that there are 3 major waves leading up to something very big that's going to happen on this planet soon. Now, the ones who started work first, of course, were not the star kids who are becoming evident now. It was what I have named my group. I've called myself a communicator. And the second wave is the one that started first. Now, that may not make much sense to you, but in all things ET, they do things differently, so you'll just have to bear with me on that. So if we have a look at the lines radiating out from the second wave, the communicators, they really were the pioneering contact people. We can go right back on that timeline there to the 1940s and 50s to the contactees, and we can come forward and we can encompass the abductees and the experiencers and on to people like myself and Jim Sparks, who seem to have some other purpose now that's bringing us forward. Now, I've put some words underneath here that will help you. So in the 1940s and 50s, we approached contact experiences with amazement and fascination. We heard about these lovely angelic beings that the contactees were having contact with, okay? And it was amazement and fascination. But hello, along came the abductees with with the seemingly negative experiences with the greys. And so up came debunking and ridicule. Moving on through in the 90s, there was very much a resurgence again. Hey, we have got some integrity here. We did experience this. We would like someone to listen. A resurgence coming through and a feeling of commitment. And that's when I started really public speaking, was 1989, just prior to 1990. So there's this resurgence of, no, I am not going to be pushed down. I'm not going to be told that I'm a kook or there's something wrong with me. I have experienced this. I can go through my life and I can itemize these things. For example, myself, where I lived, I had an abduction, contact abduction experience, which I used to call it in those days. And a week later, my friend rang up and said, have you been down to the harbour? And I said, no. And she said, oh, I think your mate's been to see you. I said, well, what the hell are you talking about? She said, there's 3 big circles in the mud down off Beach Grove. And the half of the community, in the coastal community I lived in at the time, had been down there. There were 3 large, 1.5 metre wide circles raised up into a dome. You couldn't chip it, you couldn't get it to flake or chip or mark it. It was in a perfect triangle, and it was exactly where I recalled having been floated on board a craft a week and a half before. So there's that kind of stuff that has made people like me in the 90s saying, no, 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 enough. We have got a story to tell. We need scientific backing. We need people to come and talk to us about what we've experienced. Let's pull our knowledge together and find some answers. And I think of Andy with the crop circles. It's the same thing. We need to pull together and find answers. Going on to 2000, we've had disclosure. And so we get new examination, a period of new examination. And moving on forward, I'll go into that in a minute. But the second wave people started work way back. Okay? We were the first ones to start the work. Being educated on board the craft, learned things, been shown what we're doing to the planet, what we need to do to fix it. And a lot of those people who've had these experiences have now moved into areas of professionalism. And as some people in this audience that I can see over there could tell you, there are a lot more professionals coming forward now validating this. And one of them is Dr. Rudy Schild, astrophysicist in the States. Very famous, and we've lost her. And he is now coming forward speaking at UFO conferences and saying, I have been speaking to abductees and what they are saying in terms of physics, astrophysics, makes sense to me. And just finishing off, we look at this one. So Mary's lot now, the star kids. Now we're up to the star kids, okay? The first wave. When I say the first wave, not the second, the first wave, it's because they are the first to become really overtly visible. Everyone has been able to call my group, the second wave, the kooks. But now we have this group, as Mary has presented to you today, who have this terrific backing now of things they are able to do that is being qualified by science and professionals. But our group is still there, hanging in. Okay, so they started around the 90s or so, and they're going through, and you can see the last aqua line there going out into the distance, into the future, because they will be still working on out into the future. And the last one, we put in the third wave. My son is in that group. He has a vast, extensive education on board craft, and he doesn't remember any of it, but I remember him being there. Parents like me, who are parents of the end wave, the end point, what the ETs call the end point human, have been given a vast education also. We had to be given that education in order to be able to bring these children up. And a lot of the parents of these children don't remember consciously that they've had that. But you can't bring forward a whole new species or generation, shall we say, if you haven't done some preparation for it. And if these ETs are so intelligent, why would they leave that education out? Okay, So these are the implementers, and they will remain concealed. These are not the star kids. These are what the ETs referred to me as the end point humans. That doesn't mean to say that there's nothing after that. We will carry on evolving. But that is the point they wanted to get us to so that we can then do that evolution ourselves. Okay? And their lines go well on into the future also. They have remained concealed because they are not to be associated with the star kids. They are going to be people who move on into top positions. They will be highly intelligent people who will move on into areas that will affect the world dramatically, environmentally, legally, socially, in every level. This concealed group who've been quietly and silently vastly educated on board craft will take us into the future. And the star kids, as Mary has said, are the ones who wake us up to the fact that it is happening, that they are here, that we are having contact. And the star kids, that's their role, to wake us to that fact. I've listened to every speaker here today. I'm just tying it up now, Di, don't panic. Okay. And I'm going to show you one more picture, and that's the last one. And I've listened to every speaker here today, and I had hoped to have time because I've written down a little thing that every single one of you speakers said that ties in, that brings us together, that is a common thread that we all have. So, although we may be talking on vastly different things, we are linked. And the last picture is one my husband did. Now that's from a different experience when I was 8 years old. And I was just about to be beamed back down in a beam of light with a being who was escorting me, because they do take care of us, despite what some people may have you believe. And he, showing care to a human child, etherically, not with his physical arm, but etherically, energetically, put an arm around me. And because I had learnt this kind of thing on a craft, and because at that age I was a little bit cocky, I did the same. And he said telepathically, "That's good, well done." And down we went. Now this to me epitomises the future, my hope for the future. This is my personal experience. It's not the experience of everyone who has had contact, and I acknowledge that. But that is my hope for the future, that we can all join together and investigate this phenomenon, which is going to impact hugely on our future. Thank you, folks.